Hi there, I'm Jason Kupler, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Officer for Vancouver Island Regional Library. And today I'm interviewing author Michael Christie about his book Greenwood in advance of his author reading here at the Vancouver Island Regional Library, the Harbourfront branch, on January 25th. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Jason.
Did I get the date right on your event? It's the 25th, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, it's on my digital calendar. Don't trust my memory, but I think that's right.
It's next Saturday. It's whatever the Saturday is near the end of the month here.
You're correct.
Great. So how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, how
Good.
about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. And
Hmm.
end of a kind of a different kind of a week. So yeah,
It has been. It's been with all the snow and the school closures. It's been a good day for a good week for readers. I think everyone's been
yeah,
huddling inside
absolutely.
with books, so I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I have some questions that my colleague and librarian Casey prepared for us. So I'm going to start and start reading through those, and then I have some of my own questions. My reaction to reading Greenwood over the holidays, and if there's anything else you want to add, we'll just go from there. All right. You
Sounds great.
have another sip of coffee?
It's a tea, actually. I can't
Oh, is
drink
it?
coffee
Okay.
this late in the day. It'll
Oh, I
destroy
need
my
it.
sleep. Yeah.
I need to keep going. All right. Mike, the book is at once historical fiction set at multiple periods in the past and science fiction set in the future. How did you negotiate writing in those genres at once?
It's a good question, and there's a big debate around the idea of dystopian fiction, and there's been some debate around whether this book that I've written is a work of dystopian fiction. And I had thought of it differently. I thought of it more as, I'm only jumping about 15 years into the future, and the world that I write about in the future is different than the world we're experiencing now, but it's also didn't require a huge amount of imagination, sadly, to go there
Right.
for me. So I spent a lot of my time on Galliano Island, just off the coast of Vancouver, and unfortunately, there the western red cedars are browning and dying currently due to repeated drought stress, climate change induced drought stress. And so my idea in the book, I write about the great withering, which is a sort of a phenomenon that destroys most of the world's trees. That idea didn't feel so science fiction to me, unfortunately. So I like to write in between genres. I like to write in between classifications, and I think
Mhm.
that with this book, I really tried to do that.
Yeah, and I personally think it works. That works really well. When I first started reading it, like the first 10 pages, and I saw it, 2035 written on the page. And really, someone said to me right around New Year's that 1990 is as far away as 2050 is. And you stop and you think that's crazy. But really, 2035 is a short 15 years away. So when I first started reading it, I'm like, oh no, this is dystopian fiction, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm in the mood for that right now.
Hmm.
But yeah, like you said, it's a very possible future, and it turns out that that's set in 2035 isn't the only thing that the book is about. So for me, it was funny because near the end of the book, I was wanting more of 2035 than what you wrote in the end. So
Yeah.
um, so it's funny because I started out thinking, oh no, it's dystopian. I don't
Yeah.
want to be this far in the future. And then you take us, you take the reader back, almost a century, actually more than a century, and then you find yourself wanting more of this, to find out what happens. Which, and I should have said earlier, spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't read or finished the book, but it's something that you don't give us very much of in the end. All right, so next question.
Yeah.
Although the book takes the form of a multi-generational family saga, many of the family ties are in fact found family. Harris and Everett are brothers by virtue of them being the survivors of the train wreck, and Everett becomes Willow's father by finding her and taking care of her as his own infant. Can you speak about the theme of found family?
Yeah, it's something that it's a notion that is very close to me personally, for one, and another, I've always loved these kind of grand epic novels that have a family tree in the beginning and sort of really span across time, and demonstrate how one family has negotiated entire eras of history. But I've always found them sort of fundamentally flawed in the sense that even just a simple family tree is an incredible deception, because it leaves out all the people on the edges. All the wives' families often are left out. It's a very patriarchal kind of
Right.
structure. So I wanted to kind of both do that, write a family epic, but also question and interrogate what a family really means, because often I think we have a sort of simplified version of what constitutes a family, how a family is made, and it's very much of a bloodline kind of view. But I think in the families of my friends and my own family, you see something much more complex, and I would argue more
Hmm.
beautiful at work.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So her next question is, Greenwood is part of a growing body of the genre climate fiction, or cli-fi fiction, that deals with climate change and global warming. I wasn't actually aware that there was such a genre right now. Um, are you a reader as well as a writer in this genre? Do you have any other cli-fi books you would recommend?
I'm currently writing a list of my 10 favorite cli-fi novels for the Guardian newspaper.
Oh, great.
And so, yes, this is in the top of my mind right now. I mean, it's funny because people have called my book science fiction, but it's almost, interesting the fact that fiction has not really been engaging with climate change, and particularly
Right.
looking at Australia right now, looking at all the stuff that is cropping up all over the world. That's islands disappearing, sea level
Mhm.
change, species extinction. How come everyone isn't writing about this right
Yeah.
now? This is as real as it gets, but
Yeah.
yet it's still viewed as science fiction when we talk about this stuff. And I think that's a big problem that we have. So my number one book of work of Cli-Fi is actually The Grapes of Wrath, which is a book that's extremely important to me. John Steinbeck
Hmm.
didn't know he was writing climate fiction at the time and didn't have a word for it. But when you think about that book, there's a massive human-caused uh, climate disaster in the Dust Bowl brought
Correct.
about by greed and dumb farming practices, and people are fleeing it uh, to the coast in a search of a better life. And if that isn't a climate change story, I'm not sure. In a microcosm, I'm
Right.
not sure what else is. So that the Overstory is a book that's really quite important to me. The Word for World is a Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin is a fantastic early work of Cli-Fi. Those are just a few.
Yeah. When is that going to be published in The Guardian?
It's probably going to come out around the time that my book comes out or Greenwood comes out in the UK, which is February 24th.
Oh, okay. So do we have to wait for that list before then, or is that something you could email us and we could put on our Facebook?
I could email you the
Yeah,
list without the sort of
right.
write up for each thing,
Yeah,
but yeah, just a
yeah.
bare list. I could do
Just
that.
the list. Yeah, that'd be
For
great.
sure.
And then
Yeah.
we'll look for your write up in a month's time.
Yeah.
Right, great. Um, how do you see Greenwood in conversation with the classic Canadian literature theme of man versus nature?
It's a very good question. And it's, so much in Canada has been written about man versus nature and this struggle, and the Margaret Atwood's Survival obviously has been a hugely influential book in relation to the Canadian identity and our place within the sort of the violence of nature and the dangerousness of nature, and us just being surviving in it. But I think Greenwood has a different um, view on nature. It's at one time, it's not an argument that we humans are just awful despoilers, and nature is this hapless victim that we all ought to pity. I think, which a lot of environmental type writing can um,
Right.
take on that tone. I think it's more complicated than that, and I think that we need to really rethink our relationship with nature in general, and really look at it as a kind of interdependence. And uh, if you look at how this book is structured, it's like every character is dependent on another character, and it's almost like a web of interdependence throughout the
Hmm.
novel. And as well with nature, and the natural world being, sustaining us, killing us, supporting us, or awing us with its beauty. It's all part of the same thing.
Yeah, and even in, there's one quote, I think it's near the end of the book, or it might be three-quarters of the way through, but just how, um, if you look at a family or even in the forest, it's about the forest, not the trees, right? And I think in the book too, it's really interesting how there's really no black and white. I mean, you've got the industrialists, but you also have the activists. But even they shift a little bit. Even Willow, one of the main characters, environmental activist. There's some shifting that you wouldn't expect with her, and also her father, the industrialist. So yeah, it's fascinating that it's not black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray in Greenwood.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, all the books that I love don't have good guys and bad guys, and
Right.
someone asked me why once, and I remember just thinking, because I'm an adult, and
Yeah. Right.
that's
Life
what
isn't like that.
life is
Yeah.
like. That you grow up and you realize that, wow, the CEO of a major oil corporation is not a mustache twisting villain who's
Right.
thinking that he's going to destroy the world, right? It's
Yeah.
much more complicated than that. And fiction at its best, I think, can get at that
Right.
complexity. It can portray us as just human,
Hmm.
and doing the best with what we have. And you could say that about every character in this book. They're doing their best with what they've got, and
Yeah.
that's my experience with people anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. What does Greenwood have in common with your two previous works of fiction, the novel If I Fall, If I Die, and the interlinked short stories collection, The Beggar's Garden? In what ways is Greenwood different? And I guess in what ways is it the same?
Such a good question. I feel like I'm not even close to any kind of understanding with respect to like what I've been doing so far. I mean, I've been writing for a while now, but the clarity as to like my global or my larger purpose is not quite there for me yet. But if it ever
You're
will be.
too close to it.
That's right. But I do see themes recur. I see family dysfunction clearly, or family bonds being tested. I see marginal people. I tend to write about people who are outsiders to some degree. There's a woman who doesn't leave her house for 20 years. There are drug users, there are mentally ill, there are people struggling with grief, depression, all these sort of uh, all of these themes are recurring in my work, and also like intergenerational misunderstanding. I find I write a lot about in Greenwood in particular. There's this real, you know, one generation, as you mentioned, is a timber tycoon. His daughter is
Right.
an environmentalist, and her son is a carpenter. And so there's
Right.
this kind of push and pull that goes on between the generations, that I've really noticed in my experience of the world, and it's really something I like to get at with my fiction.
Yeah. All right. Greenwood is set to be published in the US in February.
Mhm.
I think the novel and its themes will translate to an American audience.
Well, it's so far so good. I mean, it's a major publisher in the U.S. We've got a bunch of really good feedback. It's getting a review in the New York Times. It's
Oh, great.
yeah, there's been a lot of excitement. I think they're particularly around um, trees and climate change and carbon and, you know, our role in nature